Guys, it's Xanthe. I just wanted to give you a recap from Monday's session, second Photoshop lesson that we did. I do apologise for the delay. This is the first chance that I've had where I haven't had clients screaming at me, children screaming at me, dogs barking. I do have a chicken that's going off next door, so I apologise for background noise. So I'm just going to launch straight into it today. I don't want to spend too much time on the path building, but I do want to go straight into our asset and our bed head and changing the colours, adding fabric textures and whatnot. So let's go straight into that. We have our open, our Command O, or we can go up to File, Open. We go up to our assets and we get our first asset there, our one simple modern bedroom with a view. So this PSD, I've done a path for you already. So the purpose of this task is that we're going to look at colour editing and we're going to strip the colour out of that bed head. We're going to bring that down to white. So for our first thing that we're going to do, we're going to duplicate that background layer. You need to double click that and just type in background. Now there's two ways we can duplicate this. We can click and drag it onto our new layer icon down at the bottom here, or we can right click or control click and go up to duplicate layer up here. So we're going to just call this WF, and that's just my thing. That's what I call my acronym, or my little indicator that I know that this is the working file layer. I'm just going to lock that background because I do want to keep that background in its original integrity, so that if I do need to go back, I always have that available for me without having to affect going back to opening the file from scratch. So it's really important, just as good practice. I do need to say that the more layers you do put into this document, the bigger the file size will be. So just keep in mind that for a final file supply to a client, you might want to compress this later on. But for the meantime, we're just going to focus on doing the WF working file. Please make sure that that is selected on that layer. So we're going to go to our paths panel. Now I've pre-built you a path. Now in our little in our little path image, you can see there I've got white. That's what's going to be selected when we get our make selection task in our paths. So what we're going to do is we're going to have to invert that. So when it's white, that's what's actually going to be editable. So the reason why I've done this is so that way if you do get stuck, you know how to invert. So we're going to go up to our little menu icon. We're going to make selection. We're going to choose 0.5 pixels and we're going to select OK. So here we go. If I changed any of that background context, whether I change the color or remove the pixels, that area there is what will be editable, not the bed head. So it's important now at this stage that we invert that selection. So we can go up to select, inverse, and there's our shortcut there, Shift Command I. So now we actually have our bed head, and that's what's going to be editable. So I'm just going to get you to go back to your layers panel and just double check that we're working on the WF. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. I'm going to use my Command plus, or I can go up to View and zoom in and out through here. And I'm just going to show you I'm just going to sort of explain why we can't just add a color to white. We do need to get this background white, and we can't just add a color because we start losing that highlights, those shadows, and those things that make that bed head real in context. So I'll just undo that and delete that layer. So there's a few ways we can do this with our color modes and to change the color. So the best way, not the best way, but the best access way is to go to your image adjustments. Now we're going to start off by looking at our levels. Now this is purely about shadows, our midtones, and our highlights. This color mode or image adjustment method focuses on the light. It doesn't so much focus on the color, but it focuses on the light, shade, and the tones. And you can see here we've got a nice histogram. There's no gaps in it, it's just ups and downs. If we start playing with our shadows and we move that up, we're actually reducing the light that's in there because all the midtones are moving up. If we push that down, we start getting a really crazy saturation. So we're just putting some light and shade. We're not changing any color, but with this panel in particular, we're just moving around that light. So if we drop our midtones down, so while we are getting sort of more of a white tone, we are losing some of that shadow depth. So it's important that this is, and just if you're doing a color adjustment, that this is all done really subtly. Even if we try to bring that shadow back up, we get some naff little shadows happening here. So I'm just going to cancel out of that. So that way I've shown you that that's sort of the light shade adjustment. We're going to go back up to image. I'm going to go to adjustments. We're going to go to hue saturation. So I'm going to start from the bottom to show you what these three elements do. We've got our light and shade. So as opposed to our levels, this actually just turns things on and off to light and white. So it's just adding that extra, that white in there rather than shifting the light. So we have our lightness and our darkness. We have our saturation, which is our desaturation, so we're taking that colour out, which is essentially what we'll come back to doing this task. Or we can throw the saturation right up. So obviously the more saturation you have, some of the blowouts, for instance here, you lose all that data. So be really careful with the way that you use your saturation. It is a gradual, just slowly just adding it in, but making sure that you don't get sort of blowouts in certain those highlights. And our hue, which just along the colour spectrum allows us to shift that colour. So we'll cancel out of that for now. We'll go into our next, which is adjustments and colour balance. Now this needs to be done in very gradual tones as well. Down here we start in our tone balance. We have our shadows, our midtones and our highlights. I like to start off with my shadows. If I start off with my midtones and adjusting colour, I find that the result doesn't get where I want to quicker. So if I start with my shadows and then I work my way up to the lights. So it's really important to start there, I think. Now something with colours is that you don't want to throw too much colour in again. Because you can get some crazy results. Now the difference between using this, for instance, and our hue saturation is that we still retain some of the other colour information, whereas the saturation sort of lost a lot of that. It actually changed some of these yellowy tones to, in this context it would change it to completely green. So the great thing about this colour balance is that it just pushes some of those other highlights in without having massive consequences, because you've got those different tones there, your midtones and highlights, which allow you to adjust that into more of a natural context as opposed to your hue saturation. So this is it's quite an interesting one. You do need to remember that the more colours that you push in, you do have that same sort of problem with your saturation. You start losing some data. So it's really important that you look at this picture as a holistic. So there are your three main that we like to use. The three main was your levels. We've got our hue saturation, and we have our colour balance, which is next. So for the keyboard shortcuts, colour balance, Command B, hue saturation, hue and U, and levels is the L. So it's pretty self-explanatory with the words, but if you do lose it, it's always an image and adjustments up here. So you do have a few others, but the levels and these two colour balance are really important. There are others, and I do like to use them for very quick mock-ups, but I wouldn't do them for a proper finished art purpose. But replace color is a very handy in the right image. If you click that palette and you click your eyedropper, it selects all the colors within that range. So I can go through and change that really quickly. Now, where this would work is if you're in a studio setting. For instance, if you had a chair and it was against a white wall, and you just needed to change one of the cushions on it, and it was one color that was off, you can actually just quickly go in here and click replace color. It's not a foolproof thing, but it's just a quick way just to quickly adjust. But you still have that hue, saturation, and light and dark there. And I don't need a selection for that usually, because the color picker will pick all the tones in that image. So I do use that, but very rarely. I wouldn't use that for a finished art. Okay, so we're going to, there are three main. We're going to actually start reducing this because I know I need to take this color out. I'm going to start with my hue saturation and just slowly, like I said, it's a little bit of Mr. Miyagi, slowly just pull it out. Don't pull it all out at once. So we're just going to drop that saturation down so that way it's not such a yellowy tone. We can always do our preview check from where it was before and after. And I'm just going to add a little bit of white. See, that's too much. I just worry about losing some of that shadow data. So I'm just going to keep that down to 60. And I'll take that up to about 20, 25. So plus 25. So if we're looking at our neutral line there. So preview, not too bad. I'm going to go into my levels now because what I want to do is I want to reintroduce some of those shadows again. So I'm going to go into Image and Levels, or Command L. And I'm just going to pull that shadowing up. So I start getting more colour back into here, some more brown. So I'm just going to keep that light. Just going to move that over the side and check my highlights over here. They look okay. Add a little bit more shadow. And then bring my mid-tone up. Mid-tone down, I beg your pardon. Okay. So if you look where we were, it was a really dusty grey. We just still got that yellow tint through it. But all in all, I think it's quite a nice solution. Not quite white, so I've got a bit of blowout over here. Okay, that'll do. Happy with that. Right, so now we're just going to change that tint. If we look in the context of that image, it's still quite sort of yellow. I want to sort of just bring that into a little bit of a cool tone. So I'm going to go to Image Adjustments, and I'm going to go into Color Balance. Now, remember I start off with my shadows. Just going to zoom into that area again. This is the area that I'm looking at, this area and this area predominantly, because they're the ones that have the most change. So you've got your highlights, mid-tone, shadows. So that's what I'm focusing on from a visual point of view, where I'm referencing. So going to our shadows, I'm just going to throw in a little bit more cyan and a little bit more blue. Like I said, it's not an exact science, and it's a really, really touchy thing. So you've got to be very careful not to just throw everything at it. You've just got to be very, very subtle. We're only making a subtle change just to get it to that white hue. So I just want to pull through some of that. I'm just going to throw in a little bit of magenta in my highlights. I want to take that green out of it, so I'm just having a little play. So I don't want that blue, don't want that. So I go back to my shadows and just have a little manipulate. So if I get lost, I just check my preview. Okay, yep, where I was and where I am now. So I'm kind of happy with that now, just at this stage, because I'm going to sort of start this process again a little bit. I'm just going to go to Saturation, I'm just going to reduce the saturation again, just because I'm a perfectionist and I want to get it sort of a little bit on par, and throw in a little bit more light. Okay, well, that was pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that now. Kind of looks neutral, looks white. I've still got very light shadows there, but that's okay. So I've deselected. Up here, select and deselect, just so I could see that marching ants. If I want to go back, I can either reselect it via my paths, or I can just go back to here. Just have a look. Okay, so now that we've dropped that down to white, we're going to just practice with some blending modes. Going to add a new layer by simply clicking the new layer icon in the layers palette. I'm just going to put colour, and we're going to go over here. Now remember, this is our foreground is the one on top and our background is the one behind. We can switch those by clicking those two arrows. So I'm just going to click on my foreground colour. Now we're going to go with something completely outrageous. So as I was specifying in our session, this here we can actually set in a colour, a specific colour. So if you had a client that came to you, for example Cadbury, and they came to you with their colour code, their purple colour, and they gave you a code, you should be able to enter it into this point. So your RGB would sit here, red, green, blue. Now red, green, blue is, the RGB is for digital context. CMYK over here, and now I'm actually pointing on my screen, it's probably not helping. CMYK is for printing applications, so we've got digital and print, and we've got hex, which is essentially RGB, but it's just a keychain, a different way of coding, essentially. So any of these three will help you to prepare your files and select a colour if as required, as requested. Alternatively, you can scale and just pick your own. So I'm just going to go with something completely out there. I'm going to go with a hot fuchsia, and I'm just going to click OK. So this is now into my foreground. I have a new layer called Colour, which I've just clicked here to create, and I'm going to go Option Delete. So here we've got that flat colour, it's over the top, it's extremely eccentric. I'm going to get you to deselect, up here to deselect, or Command D. And we're going to go up to this little, into our layers, we've got blending modes. So we got where our normal sits, we can see our different blending modes. I like to use multiply a lot. So if you select that, you still see a lot of that detail. It carries through a lot of those shadows. Another alternative is I do actually use overlay a fair bit, but not in this context, but for some images, if I just want to push some colour through, particularly in print, but that's a graphic design lesson, why I would use that. But having a play with these to find your right lighting adjustment, your blending mode, it really all depends on the colour and the image that you're working with. So have a bit of a play with what the different outcomes are. Some focus on the dark, and the others focus on blending with light. So for instance, screen brings out a lot of those whites and removes a lot of those dark colours. So have a bit of a play with that and explore that, because that's a lot of fun and you can get some really cool and interesting effects using colour. And there's also opacity, so don't forget that, I'll just put this on multiply, but you don't actually have to have it at 100%. You can actually start making it subtle, and I do recommend that subtle is probably your way to go, particularly with a colour like this. Okay, so once you've had a bit of a play with these blending modes, you can see why and where these sort of come in. We'll start bringing in our fabric texture. So what I'm going to get you to do is I'm going to get you to find your fabric swatch. whether that's through warwick.com, through the internet, or through a swatch that you've already sampled and you've saved. Now, for your purpose, I recommend that you save your swatches separately, because you might need to do that later on in mood boards rather than just bringing them straight into this file. So save them separately. If you want, you just click and drag, or you can open. Click and drag's easiest. And we're just going to click it and we're going to enter. Now remember from our first lesson we had our smart objects. Because I've clicked and dragged it, I've got my smart object there. I'm just going to right click and rasterize that. No, it's not going to let me. So the smart object is the link, and I want to get rid of that dinka. And for some reason, oh no, there it is. I have to click on the layer, not the image. I have that rasterized layer. So now if I double click that, it's not going to take me to a link layer. So what we're going to do with this swatch is, because if I increase the size of this, it's not going to sit well in context. So I'll just show you what I mean by that. Proportionally, the fabric texture. What's going on? Why aren't you working it? The fabric texture is going to be too big for that design. So if I put a multiply on it, it's way too big. So there's other ways to do this, but for your purposes, it's probably easier to do it by duplicating and just creating your own repeating pattern. So I'm just going to go back. I'm going to go back to my where I rasterized it. Now I'm going to just duplicate that by clicking and dragging it onto that layer. And then I'm going to use my cursor, which is up here in my tools, or just click V. V for Vegemite. And I'm just going to use my arrows and I'm just going to pop it over there. Now if your pattern doesn't repeat, you will have lines that make it look a little bit awkward. So that way when you do put it in, it won't sit flush. So be careful with what swatches you do and how they sort of sit together. And that's only from experimentation. So we're going to duplicate that a couple of times. We're going to just click V, move it over, lock it in position. We're going to do that max 5 times. Oops, sorry, I've dropped that behind. Duplicate it, pull it across, and one more time, and pull it across. So that way we're just going to cover the length of that bit. I'll just hide that for you. So we want to make sure that we've got a nice width and that we can move it around. So I'm just going to get you to select all of those swatches, those 5 that we've just selected. So if we click on the top one and hold Shift, click on the next one, and keep down, we're actually selecting multiple at the same time. I can control and I can, where's my merge? Yeah, I can merge layers, or I can just go Command D. No, Command E, beg your pardon. Command E. I'm just going to duplicate that again. So we've got that one long swatch now. I'm just going to duplicate that. I'm just going to pull that down. So just move with my arrow keys, make sure I'm in good position. Command E, or hold the select, and Command E, or right click, merge layers. Now I'm just going to do that one more time. Going down. So I've got a nice repeating pattern. And select them both. Command E for egg, or right click, merge layers. So now we have one big layer swatch, and you can see here we've got some repeating things. In the context of this fabric, it's okay, we can pass with this one. So we're just going to go back to our layers because we've got that preset path, and you can kind of faintly see it there. Just making sure that our entire swatch covers that area. We're going to go to our menu, dinka, make selection. We're going to do that 0.5 again. Okay. We're going to go to select, inverse, because we need the interior. Now instead of deleting this pixels on the outside, we're going to put a mask. So in your layers palette, before you do anything, we're going to go down the bottom here to the third one along. See where I got that little tooltip? It says add layer mask. It's that rectangle with a circle. That's what we're doing. We're creating a mask so that way our pixels underneath keep their integrity, but we've kind of got we're creating a window essentially. So I can unlink those, and if I move that around, sorry, I've got to make sure that I'm on my right. You can click both of these. So I want to make sure that I'm clicked my fabric layer, and I can move everything behind that window that we've created. So there's our fabric swatch. So I'll just put that back on together. I'm going to turn off the visibility here of my colour, because what I'm going to do on my fabric layer is normal, and I'm going to click multiply on my blending mode. So with that working file, we had that white. So that way the colour integrity of our fabric swatch is still existing. So if we added colour underneath, it changes that colour of that fabric swatch. So you can ebb and change that colour as you need to, but if you've got a specific colour of your fabric swatch, then it's best to make sure that there's no colour underneath. So for instance, if we turn off the visibility on our working file, see our original yellow, and we put the swatch over the top, then you get that weird mix of that yellow and that fabric swatch colour. That's because on our fabric swatch we've got the multiply on it. And the reason why you need that is because you can't have it flat. You do need to have that shadowing underneath. Of course, you can try other options. I'll put my working file. You know, you've got your overlays and bits and pieces, but you still retain all of that detail there. So essentially that's our how to add a fabric swatch into a bed head. I'll put it back on multiply. Throw a bit of colour. I'm going to just chuck that into a different percentage. And there you go. That's how you add a fabric swatch into and change your bed head colour. Yeah. So our next task that we did, I sort of wanted to show you in our lesson was, so that was our colour adjustments and and adding a fabric swatch, changing texture, adding texture. I wanted to show you some quick retouching. Now we did have an exercise planned. I think it was retouching. This one, yeah, that's right. So I'm just going to click and drag that into my Photoshop here. Alright, fantastic. So there was two ways that we did this in the session. We wanted to get rid of that vase on that table. Here's a pretty ugly vase, just saying. I'm going to duplicate, I'm going to just double click layer, background. I'm going to duplicate it, do my WF, my working file, and select enter. I'm going to zoom in. And this is a perfect image because we have lots and lots of pixels we're working with here. So I'm just going to try and get as much as I can of this data. I'm using my marquee. So I just need a square, and basically I'm just like cutting and pasting over the top. So my marquee can be found up here in my tools. See how I've got the tooltip there, it says M. I can change the feather of that too. I can change that from to being softer or just a hard line. 0 is a hard line, and I'm showing you 0 because we'll do a mask on this particular asset. But if I was to use this in real, like in a real project, I probably would add a feather. But for this context, we're just going to do a 0. We're going to draw that, and we're going to get as much pixels that we can that don't have this green. We don't get that corner change. We're nice and low. We still have that height, so we capture all of that. So we're going to grab this section and we're going to move it over on top of that. So the way I'm going to do that, now that I've selected this, I'm going to edit, copy. Well, there's your Command C, and then I'm going to paste it. So I'm going to copy and edit and paste. and it didn't paste. There we go. And over in layer 1, so I'm just going to put Retouch. Oops. And then what I'm going to do is make sure I'm on my cursor, or V, move tool, and I'm just going to hold Shift, because Shift's going to keep it all in that line. It'll keep it in that vertical line if I need to, or it will keep me in my left right, so I can't move it like this if I hold Shift. Shift will just lock it. I'm just going to draw it across. Now I can move it up a little bit. Yeah. So that's just a quick way of covering. We've just covered that item. And now we're going to look at just smoothing out those edges. So a quick way to do it would be use your eraser tool, which is the E. And you could just erase those edges and just use your eraser and go and wrap around it. But the problem with doing that is that you lose the data in that pixel. So I can't get that back. So what's done is done with the eraser. And just so you know that with the eraser and the same with the brush, you can increase the size of it by using your brackets, or you can go here and you can increase the size of that. So I can't see because it's too big, but I can increase the size to 76 pixels. It says 76 there. Or I can reduce it to, one or two. So for the context of this, that's quite neat. It's a 12. So, and I've got a feather on it as well. So there's other things that you can do with your brushes there, your calligraphy. So that gives you sort of a bit more of a thinner and thicker sort of tone, change of that brush. That's the eraser. Essentially, that's the same as a brush in the functionality of that. That's that application there. So you can choose what you want, the feather. So what we're going to do for this purpose is we're going to add a mask. Now we did that in the last exercise with the bed head when we did the fabric. We didn't remove the fabric background, but we did create a mask. So we make sure that our retouch layer and our copy layer is selected, and we're just going to go down to the third little icon here, the rectangle with the circle, and click Add Layer Mask. So this is the Mr. Miyagi that I was sort of saying. This is the wax on and wax off. When the colours, when the retouch layer, which is always this one, don't work off the left hand, work off the right hand one, the masking layer, the window. When that is selected, your foreground and background colours will turn to black and white because you don't need colours. And this is essentially thinking about it as on and off. So what pixels are turned on, what pixels are switched off. So because we're doing an erasing mode now, so you see how I'm just slightly just feathering that? I'm actually removing or masking those pixels. If I wanted to switch those by clicking that, I can paint it back. So I haven't deleted any data, I've just deleted the window. I'm just changing the window that we see that data. So it's all still there, and you see the more I paint, the darker that will be. The more I remove, the darker that will be. So if I go like this, see how in that layer, that right hand one, you can see that I've taken more off that. So it'll just show you, it just gives you a little indication of where that layer mask has, what it has removed and what it hasn't. So I'll go back to here. I'm going to make sure that I'm on my foreground colour ready to erase. Now for those who are good with keyboard shortcuts and don't want to switch it manually in the tool, you can just do X, and click X will switch them over. So I'm just going to go and get rid of some of those with that nice feather. If I want to do a straight line, a quick way to do it is click, hold Shift, move your cursor down, and then click again. So it's a real quick way just to get your from A to B without having to click and drag it. So click, move your cursor over the other side without clicking. So click, release, move, hold Shift, and click again. So that's just a quick way just to get up the top and back. So what we've done, I'll just put my working file back on. I've just taken off that hard line so that way there's not so much of not so much of a straight line. Let's have a look over here. Nope, all good. Take that off. So the next thing that I'm going to show you is the stamp tool. So we're going to take that layer off. So essentially that's kind of blended it in. You do have some textural issues here, and that's where I would start moving into my stamp tool. For this, just to get a hang of the stamp tool, I'm not going to use this. Now I noticed this in the class, so we're just going to ignore that for this next task. We're going to go to our working file, and we're going to zoom in, and we're going to retouch this by doing our stamp tool. Now our stamp tool can be found by clicking the S, and we've got stamp up here, clone stamp tool, stamp. Now same again with our brushes, we're just going to increase the size. I want you to increase it just to about 12. Now remember the feather actually changes the integrity of your stamp, so it's really important that when you're stamping you don't do massive areas. So if I was doing big areas like this, and trying to get across, and I went across, see how the table sort of starts getting a bit funny? It just sort of starts blending that outside of that area. So we're just going to make sure that we keep it on a nice small, because we're only going to try and pull little bits out. It does take a little practice, but the less you have to stamp, the better. So that's why I did show you this whole retouching first layer, that big panel, as opposed to just going through and stamping. So for stamping, you need to have an anchor point of where you're stamping that, where you're taking that information from. And to do that, I'll find an area and I say to myself, okay, I want to replicate this area and I'm going to put that over there. So I'm going to make sure that I start at the top. I'm going to move my cursor over to the right and I'm going to click Control. So Control and then click. And see how when I'm holding Control I get that little target? That's the kind of thing that you need to see. So click, and now I've got a source point. Now before I do anything else, I'm going to move my cursor over the top of that green, of that plant, and I'm going to click. So now I've done my first stamp. I'm going to just drag it all the way down. So I should be, and it's not working for me. Aha, okay. So there's my problem. I'm going to go back again. On my brushes I have my opacity. So I want to make sure that my opacity for this is sitting at 100%. So let's go through that again. So we've got our stamp, we've got our size that we want our stamp brush. We have to make sure that our opacity is not on 10, not any number for this instance. We want it to be on 100%. We're going to go over to our layer, make sure that we're on our working file. And we're going to go, I'm just going to reduce the size of that, option, this is our source information, this is where we're taking our pixel information from, option, and there's our target, click, release. Now move our cursor over to the target area, the area that we're going to change, and we're just going to go down. So see what we're doing now is we're taking the information over on the right hand side. You'll see a little crosshair. That's where the pixels, that's where we're painting from. So if you think about it in that context as painting, we're taking information from another area and we're re-putting it over here. So if we have a look at our background, you can see that we've just masked that. So if I do that, if I want to move this one now, I can't just start painting because I'm going to start getting the information from over there. So I need to make sure that I reset my source quite frequently, because otherwise I start mucking it up. So I want to get rid of this area, but my crosshair is still on the right, so I need to reset it. So I need to go back option. So I'll do it from the left this time. Option, click, release. I'm going to move my cursor over and I'm going to click and I'm just going to paint. So see my crosshair is now on the left because I've changed my target point for that data. So I'm just going to release and then click again, so it's all fresh. And I'm just going to go down. Now the reason why I've done the left and right as opposed to taking information from down here, so if I've taken information from down the bottom and I'm going to click up here, then I'm going to get all those dark tones that from where I originally sourced it down there. And we don't want that. We don't want that. So if I see how I'm sort of painting that? So I'm just going to go back. I'm going to make sure that because of the tones on this are vertical, I'm going to make sure that I select from that left or right hand side, just to make sure that those tones match on that horizontal visual scale. And that's only because of that context of this image. It will be different from every image. It'll be different if you're using it for face, for instance, like retouching a face. So stamp, we're going to go option, and I'm going to do this from the right hand side, and I'm just going to take it from a little bit further and just pull that down. So a few goes of this, a bit of practice, you start getting the hang of it. This took me a long time. I used to date a photographer when I was learning this. So yeah, I've had a fair bit of practice in my day anyway from the get-go, but it did take me a long time to sort of get to know what was right and what sort of worked. Just when I actually do that, so this is important as well. When I see how I've got two tones here, I've got the grey and the wooden table. If I get my anchor source point and I click option here, and see how I move my cursor and I put it over there, and I'm on top, and I'll zoom in for you. Now it gets a bit pixely. See how underneath my cursor I've got the brown and the grey? This just gives me an idea before I plant my stamp of how that will sit. So if I start here, that means my line is going to go along there. So you can see my trajectory from on the left hand side where my little crosshair is. It's pulling the information from above. But if I'm clever, I stamp it and I move across and I keep it in that line. I use that as an indication. I can stamp that on a perfectly vertical. So just do that. And I'll stamp it from the right. Oops, option. It's hard to see that one. So there I've kind of put a line in already, so I don't have to. I've got a nice straight line. So just have a little play. Option over the right. You see, notice I do a lot of options. I do a lot of option clicks. Just I'm taking the data, and I do it frequently, so that way I don't get repeating patterns. I'm just going to try and get this table going. We've got some nice horizontal lines there, so I'll just push them through a little bit more. Right click. Oh, sorry, option click. Up. And just move that along. So if we zoom out, we've still got some shadow there. So if you did want to actually get into it a fair bit, you'd be removing a lot of this and making that a lot lighter. But you'll pass simply by just doing just the bare minimum. And remember, with stamping, the less that you do, the better. So the more you add to it, the harder, the more detail it sort of starts getting. But essentially that's what we've done. We just removed a vase just using a stamp tool. Now, just because that was fun, just going to bring Beyonce in. Remember, that's how tonally we work. We use the stamp. S there. It's going to get a bigger option. And we're going to just divot. So this is the first step for getting rid of some of those freckles and imperfections in the context of retouching someone's face, and smoothing it out. So if there's something big, this is a very handy tool. So what do? Go to our original. just by a couple of simple little things. We just start smoothing it out. So there you go. There you have it. That's it. That's the basic principles of the clone stamp, and just retouching big areas using that marquee tool. I hope that helps, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Always available. Good luck.